I get an email from the woman from the Heritage Action Zone programme. She's the one I was worried I'd basically mansplain my way through our conversation. Anyway, it turns out my fears were unfounded, and she doesn't think I'm a total bore. She tells me that she's put me on an email list to canvass opinion on what Ramsgate most needs for its regeneration. There's evidently a £20 million levelling up fund on offer from the government, and Thanet, being a deprived part of the country, more than qualifies. Margate already got 22 million, and the firm that put together the bid on behalf of the council are trying to do the same for Ramsgate. So the big money was made possible by smaller awards. 450 grand for the High Street Regeneration Fund, which was actioned by Historic England, and will largely be spent on Harbour Street, and the Ramsgate Future Fund, 2.7 million, which will be spent on the town centre. This all started in 2016, the year I moved to Ramsgate, when an urban panel from Historic England visited the town to make a report. Although I didn't know anything about it at the time, and indeed I thought I was the only person who was interested, it turns out that they saw the town as truly remarkable for its fascinating history, its buildings, most prominently the Royal Harbour, but also the quality of life it offers, the sea, the beaches, the marine environment, etc. The report on the whole criticises the District Council for failing to enforce planning regulations for poorly designed developments, failure to recognise the potential of the disused historic buildings, not encouraging the local fishing industry, not sharing responsibility of the harbour and town centre with local groups, and not seeing the strengths of the independent-minded and entrepreneurial businesses and residents. I haven't had the opportunity to ask the council leader about the panel's criticisms, and I suspect from the articles I've read online that he doesn't recognise himself or his fellow councillors in the report. The panel welcomed the recent restructuring of the council, but it's clear to me at least that it didn't go far enough. They now say they want ordinary people's opinion to be heard, but I have my doubts that that'll change anything. The council leader is acutely aware what a bad reputation it has in Ramsgate. In his address at the Ramsgate Future Zoom launch, he suggested, "We put it all behind us and focus on the bid for the 20 million. But somehow, I get the impression, he's just interested in a bigger budget. Then only the following day, I discovered that Labour had been voted out as council leaders and the Conservatives are now in control. Well, that might be a good thing, I think to myself, and I Google the new cabinet, only to discover that not one of them lives in Ramsgate, and the likelihood of any of them supporting Ramsgate projects over Margate is basically zero. Today is one of the sunniest days of the year so far, and I decide to go to the new bar on the West Cliff that's in the old monkey house, overlooking the boating pond. I message my Polish lady friend, because I keep saying no to her invitations, and she messages me back straight away, saying that coincidentally she's on her way there with her landlord. I'm only a couple of pints down when they arrive, and I invite them to join. The landlord, coincidentally, has the same name as mine, which clearly makes him uncomfortable, and I don't like it either. Must be a male ego thing, which is disappointing on my part, because I thought that with all the meditation and Tai Chi, etc., I was better than that, but clearly not. But anyways, we get talking, and he shows me a picture of the boat that he lives on at Chatham Docks, for which he's the chief engineer, though to be fair, there's probably only one engineer. But my God, is it beautiful. A schooner, 2 masts, and a line to die for. He doesn't own it, but lives and works on it, the owner being a bloke who made his millions in demolition and flies around in a helicopter. Then he asked me what I do, and I never know what to say when people ask me that, so I say nothing much really, and he looks confused, like I'm trying to hide something, which I'm not. And then I say I'm making a radio programme and an audio book about Ramsgate, and he looks suitably unimpressed, which doesn't surprise me. And then I say, well, I'm a filmmaker, I guess, hoping he doesn't say anything like anything I would know. But instead he makes a kind of victory gesture, like he's finally got me to admit what I do. We're now on our second drink, which I buy, hoping that'll make him like me, which it doesn't. And he says, I just want to make a load of money, to which I reply, well, I'm not interested in money, which he hears as, I've already got loads of money. And I'm thinking, I don't really want to talk about making money, given I don't know anything about it, and I don't have any. So I just tell him how I'm trying to get involved in the regeneration of the town, and bringing some of the historic buildings back to life, to draw back the holiday makers, and how I think it's all threatened by the cement factory at the port and the cargo night flights. And he looks pensive and says he thinks the airport is a good thing and will create loads of jobs, and he doesn't think anyone will notice the noise, especially as the flight path won't go directly over the town. And I say surely the environment is more important, and he looks a little confused, and tells me he's planning to take the tendercraft out to the estuary tomorrow to see the seal colony, and I say I love doing that kind of thing and would love to see the seals. But then I realise he's not asking me, but the Polish lady, who's already said that she's busy and clearly isn't interested in seals or boats, but maybe he's trying to hook up with her, which is fine with me because I'm not. And so I think it's probably time to go, and by now I'm a bit drunk, having had a bottle of white burgundy earlier, and so I shake his hand and kiss the Polish lady's hand, which she enjoys, but not him, and I stagger off home. Later she texts me with his contact, which is thoughtful of her, but I don't expect we'll be friends. We see the world in such a different way, and I don't judge him for that, but somehow it makes me feel sad. By now I'm staying on the West Cliff in my friend's house. She's not there, and I have the place to myself, which is great, as I'm trying to finish my book before starting my degree, and have Airbnb'd my house to help pay towards the fees. I met my friend, who I've just remembered will be coming down from London today, when I first moved to Ramsgate. She's single, her husband having left her for his secretary. She's a nice woman, an artist in fact, but sometimes she gets us confused. She'll ask me who I'm texting, and then gets angry like it's any of her business. And anyway, it got so bad that I didn't see her for a while, and was mostly in New York. But here I am years later, and I'm staying in her house, and on the whole we get on well, but I still don't want to go out with her, especially because she looks a bit like my mum, who was also an attractive woman, but I didn't fancy her either. In any case, she isn't really interested in me, she just wants a husband substitute, and I already have a girlfriend, or at least a girlfriend substitute. And so I get my trunks and towel and go down to the sea, and before I get in, I take a lump of chalk and write in big bold letters on the pavement, "Yes, I still love you," and I film it and send it to her. I start my Tai Chi routine in my usual spot overlooking the swimmer's beach. A couple of the massive stone slabs that have been blocking the entrance to what was the car ferry entrance, most likely put there to deter the travellers, have been removed, and a man by his camper is sitting up his solar panels in the sun, while a middle-aged couple, dressed in matching spandex, struggle to get their paddle boards off the roof rack. For a moment I'm self-conscious about having an audience, but as I swing my arms and rise and sink, I soon forget they're there. When I finish my routine, I mumble a quick prayer, strip down to my shorts, and descend the green carpeted steps into the cold sea. The man in the van immediately gets out and walks over to the graffiti to see what I've written, but he looks a little disappointed. It's not exactly poetry, but it wasn't meant for him. Last week some child had written "penis breath," well I assume it was a child, in bold chalk capitals on the breakwater wall, which I found quite amusing. And then a few days later I noticed one of the mothers had censored it to "dentist breath," which somehow I found more offensive. If you've ever experienced the nauseating stink of rotting food stuck under a denture, you'll know what I mean. On the way back to the house, I pass a blue plaque bearing the name Wilkie Collins. It was during the mid-1850s that Wilkie had a strange encounter that would lead him to writing one of his best-known novels, The Woman in White. The story goes that the artist John Millais was accompanying the Collins brothers one night to his home in Gower Street, London. Suddenly they all stopped dead in their tracks by a scream coming from the garden of the house they were passing. Moments later an iron gate flung open, and a beautiful young woman, dressed in flowing white robes that shone in the moonlight, suddenly came into view. She soon fled into the shadows, and according to Millais, Wilkie gave chase. The next day Wilkie explained how he had caught up with the woman and asked what was amiss. She told him that she had fallen into the hands of an unscrupulous man who kept her prisoner by means of mesmerism. It was only when he threatened to kill her that she made her escape. Her name was Caroline Graves, and not only would she be the inspiration for Wilkie's most famous psychological thriller, but she would also become his lifelong mistress. And when Wilkie visited Ramsgate, he rented 2 houses, one for his wife and kids, and one for his Caroline Graves. The mystery which underlies the beauty of women is never raised above the reach of all expression until it has claimed kindred with a deeper mystery in our own souls. Clearly I'm not the only one obsessed with women. I decide to write a proposal for the building on Albert Street in the hope that the council will be so impressed they'll give it to me. There are so many derelict buildings in the town, and I don't want to see them sold to developers who either wreck them or leave them to rot whilst the property prices go up. Land banking it's called, but even that's too nice a name for it. I point out the importance of conserving our historic infrastructure, it being a massive draw for visitors, and to start a training scheme for young people in conservation skills to bring in expertise and support from the Kent School of Architecture, though I haven't asked them yet, and to let out the accommodation at premium rates in the season, a historic source of income in Ramsgate. Also have a pop-up cafe and exhibition space for local artists who will create Ramsgate souvenirs to be sold in the shop, and to celebrate the town's illustrious past by having readings from the novels of Wilkie Collins to the poems of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Well, I thought it sounded great, and I copied in the head of the Ramsgate Society, the mayor, and one of the Green Party councillors, and then waited their response. Now, when I first moved to Ramsgate, I got a call from a friend. Actually, it was an email. Someone who had worked for me years ago, when I had a studio in London. He was a film editor, and was pretty eccentric, and had always drunk too much. And anyway, he'd been on a long binge, where he'd almost died, twice in fact, and his wife had finally had enough and kicked him out. And of course I said that he should come and stay for a while. When he arrived, he was broken and full of shame. He wasn't drinking, but was clearly suffering from the disease of alcoholism, which is not just an addiction to alcohol, but is more of a disease of the spirit, and different for everyone. But in my friend's case, he had lost his will, lost his way, and I wanted to help him get back on track. So after a week or so, I found out if there are any AA meetings in Ramsgate, and eventually I managed to persuade him to go, and I go along with him. So I look up where the meeting is taking place, and it turns out to be at St. George's Church Hall on Broad Street. So when we arrive at the hall, we go in, and to my surprise, there's like 150 people in there, all chatting. And I'm thinking, crikey, Ramsgate has got more of an alcohol problem than I could possibly imagine. And these two tall men with long raincoats looking like cowboy desperados or something stride down the aisle towards the stage, and people turn around to see who we are, and the hall falls silent. And there's this one man who looks particularly interested, and it turns out he's not the secretary of the AA meeting, but in fact the chairman of the Ramsgate Society. The AA meeting was next door. So I was relieved when I received a positive response to my email, given that the Ramsgate Society already believed me to be a hopeless drunk, which to be fair is only partly true, or might even be called a half-truth, and you know what I think about those. But anyway, he said he thought the proposal to be excellent, a word that I was pleased to hear, although he added that the district council had a strict policy of auctioning buildings to generate income from the housing budget, and he didn't hold up much hope for getting it approved. Whilst that was discouraging, I was encouraged by the fact that I was not alone in my vision to repurpose some of the town's historic buildings, which I know should be obvious, given it's the Ramsgate Society and it's what they do. That morning, as I was coming back from my swim, I got a message from the mayor asking me to give her a call. I was surprised to hear from her, as she hadn't answered any of my emails recently, which I assumed was because last time we'd met, I'd reminded her that we had a date for fish curry, which I had said that I cooked, and she, being from Bangladesh, and the owner of an Indian restaurant in town, said was a personal favourite of hers. And not having heard from her for a while, I had an idea that she thought I meant a date, which I hadn't, of course, and my mind had decided that she was avoiding me. But it turned out that she just hadn't checked her emails. Funny the tricks the mind plays on you when you're paranoid. I'd made it all up and had suffered a little as a result. Anyways, back to reality for a moment. She was supportive of my plans and offered to help. And literally, as soon as I said goodbye, I got a call from the lady from the Green Party, who was similarly enthusiastic about the scheme. The Albert Street shop, that is. And I'm thinking, this is terrific. Something might actually happen here. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, someone can only make you feel small with your permission. So the battle to become ourselves is a civil war, and they're always the bloodiest. The lady whose house I'm staying in shouts up that she's going to make some lunch, and would I like any? Great, I think to myself. And at that very moment my girlfriend calls with her latest drama from New York. But I know better than to say anything other than, don't worry darling, everything is going to be okay. So it's not a conversation exactly, it's more like she's talking and I'm listening. This type of conversation can go on for some time, and we haven't quite finished before my friend is shouting up the stairs to say that lunch is ready. I ignore her, or try to, and then when I can't ignore her anymore, I ask my girlfriend to hold on for a moment, while I shout back that I'm coming. My friend comes upstairs as I'm saying my goodbyes, which includes the usual, "I love you, babe." And when I put the phone down, she says, "Who was that?" It was my girlfriend in America. She's got a drama going on and was upset. "Oh, I see," the lady says. "Well, lunch is getting cold." So we go down to the kitchen and eat in complete silence, and I can sense that she's not happy about something. But I'm not going to lie to her about who I'm speaking to on the phone, or anything else for that matter. And I've told her a dozen times that I have a girlfriend and I'm not looking for another one. But anyways, after lunch, she's still cross, and I suggest that we have a stroll along the cliff to clear the air. But we don't get any distance before she literally explodes, and suddenly she's shouting at me and telling me to fuck off, and that I can't stay in her house, and everybody's staring, and she storms off, back in the direction of the house. Looking calm but internally in turmoil, I continue along the west cliff towards the boating pond, hoping the new bar is open, which it isn't, and then slowly make my way back to the house. My friend is on the phone, to one of her girlfriends I imagine, and has no doubt been complaining that I've been leading her on, and that I'm running hot and cold. And I tell her it's too late to find a room for tonight, and is it okay if I leave in the morning? But talking to her friend appears to have calmed her down, and she tells me it's fine for me to stay. In any case, she's going back to London on the 4 o'clock train. So when the minicab is leaving, I wave goodbye, feeling rather awkward, and at the same time feeling sorry for the lady, who's obviously lonely because her husband is eloped with his secretary. But a feeling of guilt or shame stays with me for days, having been shouted at and told that I'm shit. And it just seems so unnecessary, so unfair. I know it's usually women who are vulnerable, but it happens to men too. The following day she calls me and doesn't exactly apologise, but says that she knows what it's all about. It's that I remind her of her husband, and that I'm rather like her husband in many ways. But it doesn't make me feel any better, and after we say goodbye, I can't think of anything I can do, and so I just forward her a story about a Buddhist monk. A monk decides to meditate alone away from his monastery. He takes a boat and goes to the middle of the lake, closes his eyes and begins to meditate. After a few hours of unperturbed silence, he suddenly feels the blow of another boat hitting his. With his eyes still closed, he feels the anger rising, and when he opens his eyes, he's ready to shout at the boatman who dared to disturb his meditation. But when he opens his eyes, he sees that it was an empty boat, not tied up but floating in the middle of the lake. At that moment the monk achieves self-realization and understands that the anger is within him. It simply needs to be hit by an external object to provoke it. After that, whenever he meets someone who irritates or provokes his anger, he remembers the other person is just an empty boat. The anger is inside me. I still have Airbnb guests renting my place, so I decided to go and stay in London. I managed to get a day's work playing a car salesman in a working title film. I don't have any lines, it's basically a background role. But Gemma Arterton is playing the female lead, and reckons she'd be a more suitable girlfriend if I was looking for one, which I'm not. Well, you never know. I don't want to stay with my sister because her place is too chaotic, and so is her head, and it can be a challenge being around her, especially since she started popping morphine every 5 minutes, which is what it must have been like being around Coleridge, but without the poetry. Instead, I get a room in a hotel overlooking a garden square in Bayswater, which I rather enjoy, other than the fact that it cost me more than I make on the movie. But I have crisp, clean sheets, and the staff are pleasant, and all in all, I enjoy getting away from Ramsgate for a few days. When I get to set, wardrobe put me in a grey business suit, with my gut falling over my belt, because the trousers are too small, and hair and makeup shave off my sideburns, and give me a haircut only a car salesman would have. The AD gives me some vague action behind the lead actors, like stacking papers and trying to look busy. In fact, I don't think I'm even in the shot. And Gemma Arterton doesn't even look at me once, never mind want to have my children. I'm only back at the house in Ramsgate for a minute when I get a call from my lady friend, who says she's in town for the day, and do I want to meet up for coffee? And I think, okay, sure. I don't want it to be awkward between us, and as long as she doesn't keep mistaking me for her husband, then what's the harm? But just to be sure, I go up to the bathroom and buzz cut all my hair off to make myself as unattractive as possible, and go down to the harbour, doing a pretty good impression of a scaffolder, to meet her. When she sees me, her face literally drops, and she says, "Have you had an accident with a hedge cutter or something?" I ignore that, and then she asked me about the movie and how much money I made, and I told her I didn't make any because I spent it all on the hotel, and she says, "You're getting so fat, look at that gut." And I say, "It's not fat, I have an intolerance to wheat, and I'm just bloated." And then there's a silence for a few seconds that feels like a few minutes, and she asked me if my Airbnb guests were okay, and I said yes, they were fine, and they left me a half bottle of gin. And she tuts and says, "Oh God, you haven't started drinking again, have you?" And I think, quite frankly, it's none of your business what I do. I'll drink or not drink. I'll drink myself to death if I feel like it. And then I realise that she still thinks that I'm her husband, or at least she's still angry with her husband and taking it out on me. And I don't think I can put up with it a moment longer, and I say goodbye. But as I walk away, I feel as bad that I stood up for myself as I would have by putting up with it, and have to ask myself why. And then I remember it's not all about me, but that she's in pain. Her husband has left her. And I know what that's like. It really hurts. But at the same time, it's always an opportunity to be yourself, which is so much easier when you're not in a relationship. And perhaps that's one of the things that Ramsgate and the Magic Isle is offering us. And I wish I'd been big enough to let the personal remarks just go over my head and just be able to listen, and I might have been able to help her. There's an ancient Zen Buddhist saying, "If you wish to hear the truth, then hold no opinions," which is another way of saying you only hear what you want to hear, or possibly you only hear what you're afraid of hearing, because most people don't want to hear the truth. It's often too painful. And in any case, most people are not even able to listen to anyone but the voice in their own heads. But that negative voice in your head that sounds like you isn't you, and that's why it's often better, for you and everyone else, just to smile. Coleridge was a frequent visitor to the Collins household, a distinguished landscape painter, and their mother, a reputed beauty, who looked indulgently upon Coleridge's opium habit. On one occasion, having called upon the Collinses, he broke down in front of them, in the grip of what would seem to be withdrawal symptoms. His grief was excessive, Wilkie later wrote. He even shed tears. At last my mother addressed him, saying, "Mr. Coleridge, do not cry. If opium really does you any good, and you must have it, then why do you not go and get some?" At this the poet ceased to weep, recovered his composure, and turning to my father said, "Collins, your wife is an exceedingly sensible woman." I suppose he did not delay to act upon my mother's suggestion. I was a boy at the time, but the incident made a strong impression on my mind, and I could not forget it. That Coleridge had an influence on Wilkie's writing is unknown, though he did follow in Coleridge's footsteps to becoming a lifelong opium addict. So the fate of Albert Street is to be decided at the next cabinet meeting at the council offices in Margate this evening. My friend, the councillor from the Green Party, tells me as a member of the public I'm not allowed to speak, but she can submit the proposal to the cabinet on my behalf, and I can come along and watch from the visitors' gallery. I meet her at the end of my road, and we drive, rather too fast for my liking, to the meeting in Margate. Albert Street is first on the agenda, but it soon becomes evident that the new administration refused to even consider the scheme. They regard the building as part of the council housing stock and dismiss the proposal outright, which is a pity because property prices are rising rapidly in town, and they would make more money from keeping the building than buying shares in the tobacco industry for their pension scheme. Though it's disappointing, it's kind of expected, and my overwhelming impression from the way the councillors behave towards each other is that they're more interested in political power play than in the regeneration of the Sacred Isle. There's no booing between the administration and the opposition like in the House of Commons, but there's more than a little contempt, and they just rubbish each other's policies. To rub salt into the wound, next on the agenda is a proposal to ask for more money for the Margate levelling up bid, at the same time as the Ramsgate levelling up bid is being submitted. Of course, the Labour opposition suggests that it might compromise the Ramsgate bid, but that's dismissed with even more contempt even than my own proposal. I'm not encouraged, and in the car on the way home I admit to my Green Party friend that I'm having reservations about committing to 2 years of study in architectural conservation to make a contribution to the regeneration of Ramsgate, when the Margate-centric District Council are clearly not interested. As we pull into Paradise, I explain the problem with the car spray shop guy leaving rubbish outside his place, and the greying mountain of tyres, and intimidating my Airbnb guests that day. And my councillor friend says not to worry, she can help. And I think, well, I kind of feel supported here. So much so that maybe I don't actually have to do anything. I don't have to have a confrontation with the car spray shop guy with the very high voice. Well, at least not alone. I don't want to have an ongoing battle with him. Well, forever. And I'd rather enjoy someone just hearing and understanding what I have to say and being supportive. When I get home, I write to all the other house owners on the street and suggest we start a residents' association. Although this makes me feel more than a little middle-aged, all of them respond positively, and I have a sense that I'm making new friends in Ramsgate and in the town council, and that things can improve, and it's not just me against the rest of the world. Well, that's a first. The next morning I feel full of purpose, and I stride down to the West Cliff for a swim. As I approach, I can hear the sound of a petrol generator and thumping bass music, and I know I'm not going to be able to meditate and do my Tai Chi with that in my ear. There are probably 10 or 20 caravans parked on the edge of the port facing the beaches. I know there are a number of families of travellers along the coast, most notably at Palm Bay, which is near Margate, and I think to myself, I wonder if those are the travellers from Palm Bay. I'm having some fish curry in the Ramsgate tandoori with a friend, and the mayor is there, of course, being the proprietor, and she comes over to say hi. And she asked me if I've seen the travellers down at the port, and I tell her that I have, and it turns out that the new Conservative administration, who've only been in power for a few days, didn't want them in Palm Bay, and moved them onto the port at Ramsgate, right next door to the cement factory. Our mayor is not fazed, and instead she's going to see what she can do to help, and thinks that they should be treated like anyone else in Ramsgate. And I'm thinking, yes, maybe Ramsgate is a refuge for those in need after all. This morning I have a meeting with a woman who's putting together the Ramsgate Futures bid for the 20 million from the Government Levelling Up Fund. She'd emailed me to invite me to meet before the exhibition opens at 10 a.m, so I turn up with my microphone at the ready, but I can see straight away she doesn't really want to talk to me. In fact, she tells me I'm late, which I am by about 5 minutes, but looking round I can see I'm literally the only person there, and so I'm now thinking that she's got something to hide. As we step outside for her to outline the plans for the bid, I realise she doesn't really want to tell me about the council's plans and where the money is to be spent. In fact, it's a great interview for me because she reveals more by dodging my questions than if she'd answered them. But of course her client is the district council, and she's not exactly going to say anything against them. And when I ask her if she's worked for any cement companies before, which I've already seen on their website, she says, "Oh, I can't comment on that. In any case, the website is really out of date." And it's laughable. And I think I did actually laugh, but not in a cruel way. I just thought it was silly. But as I'm walking away, I'm thinking I've got some real gems there. I realise that my iPhone has dropped out of record, and I have nothing. Well, I'm not likely to get to do that again. I haven't ever felt threatened in Ramsgate, like you do in London sometimes, just by the driver of the shit-coloured car and the macho man with the car spray shop opposite, but I kind of forgive him, because I know he can't do any better. And feeling threatened isn't always about what is happening in the present moment, but some event from the past might also be coming into play. When people want different things, they actually see things differently, like the driver who sees someone in the road, and instead of slowing down, he speeds up. Have you ever had that? He thinks the road is for cars, and he's in a hurry, and he wants to teach you a lesson. He's not able to appreciate that the pedestrian just wants to cross the road, which is pretty reasonable. His mind can't stretch that far. And he thinks he's right, which is even more dangerous. That he's in the right, and therefore the pedestrian is in the wrong, and he thinks that everybody on earth would agree with him. I googled who has the right of way on the road, the car or the pedestrian, and it turns out there isn't a law for jaywalking in this country. So it's just down to common sense and courtesy, which of course is entirely subjective. One driver had put in a comment about jaywalking, followed by the immortal words, "just mow them down," which I'm sure he didn't mean, but it still makes you shudder. When cars first took to the roads, you have to have a man walking with a red flag in front to warn people to get out of the way. Maybe they should bring that back, I'm thinking. Instead, in Ramsgate they widened the roads so cars could go faster, and the manufacturers made them faster. But really the greatest loss was people's ability to walk around town without fear of being mown down.